I think science has been, that the usefulness of science is so important that it's exaggerated. People think that unless science is useful, it's not worth doing. And of course, it's exactly the wrong way around.
Welcome back.
Oh, thank you.
So let's spend a few moments on solving the last issues. No, seriously. You all three of you talk about science that describes very fundamental issues like where are we coming from, where are we going, why are we here, and so on. In a way, it's existential science in the sense that it touches the existential questions. Do you think that these kinds of scientific projects can satisfy the human need for a narrative and meaning?
Well, let's see. Okay, well, I mean, they should.
But can they?
I mean, religion began with the same need, right? It began with the need for a narrative to try and explain why people were here and how the world came to be. And science has another narrative, and we're playing catch up, right? They had thousands of years in advance, and they've appropriated all the words, and we let them. We say loss of faith. Richard used the word faith before, and then loss of faith. That acts like you lose something when you lose your faith, but you don't lose anything. So it's an uphill battle, but the real story should address those questions, except we're not the center of it. And I think that's the point where humanity grows to the Star Trek future will be where we don't need to be at the center anymore. But it should. It's a long haul. I don't know.
I think those existential questions are exactly what we should be enthusing people about. That's what science can do. I think science has been, that the usefulness of science is so important that it's exaggerated. People think that unless science is useful, it's not worth doing. And of course, it's exactly the wrong way around. The usefulness of science is great and fine, but it's a kind of spin-off of what really matters, which is the deep existential questions you're talking about.
Do you think that there's this sort of myth that there's a coldness that descends with the acquisition of knowledge and information? And I can't think of anything that's further from the truth. I feel this real, I don't know if it's going to provide the same kind of narrative that religion does, but this real sense of belonging to the cosmos by knowing that those neutron stars that crushed together delivered gold into the universe, and that now, I mean, it's part of the world that we live in.
I agree with that, except that when my first book, The Selfish Gene, was published, I was told that a man in New Zealand, he was actually, I think, the publisher of the New Zealand edition, was so upset by it he couldn't sleep for 3 nights. And I had a letter from a man in Canada who said that he was a professor who said that a young woman pupil of his had come to him in tears because she'd read The Selfish Gene, because it gave such a bleak picture of the world.
Good job.
And he advised her not to show the book to any of her friends.
But I think though that when you were talking, to be frank, another part of it is that I think we were talking backstage about elites, about people seem separated, that there are people who do this and the rest of the people do that, and academics have perpetuated that a little too long because of the feeling of specialness, but somehow that it's a special thing and it's separate. And I think, to be frank, with Jen on stage, one of the things is that it was white men. And I think the more people see role models like Janna and other people and other women and people of color, diverse, they'll realize that it's actually a community, that it isn't. I think that's important for humanizing science too. It's really important.
That's true, yeah.
I think the aspect of community is something that's extremely underrated when we talk about these things, that you can't take away, where does a woman go in her 80s who's widowed on Sunday, if not to the community church? There actually are things we can provide that are secular that still have that sense of community, and we've failed at that, weirdly.
Yeah, we should have. I've always said, they said, but what about, first of all, they need it every Sunday, and it was actually a TV guy who's famous in the United States, Hugh Downs, if you're old enough, but he was on stage with me once, and he pointed out that there's a reason people go to church every Sunday. It's not just community. The stories are so silly that every Sunday they have to be reminded of them over and over again so they can believe them. And we don't have quantum mechanics every Sunday, you know, because you just learn it once. But we could, but it nevertheless does fulfill that community. And there are lots of other secular things that we could do. We could have rock concerts every Sunday. I mean,
this is a secular thing we're doing.
Yeah,
that is community building.
Yeah.
There is, you know, an opportunity to come and be together.
I had an Australian friend who wondered why, he was asked why so many old people are to be seen in church, and he said, cramming for the final.
Richard, could you get your mic a little bit closer to, just a little bit closer to your mouth?
No, I don't think.
Can you hear us well?
May I?
Okay, fine. Then it's fine. Then it's fine. No, but I was also thinking that very often I hear people say, "Oh, science, that's too difficult for me. That's not for me," and they don't really realize that science is what every child does.
But
when
it's
he's
more than that. Look, we just heard some beautiful, wonderful young people. I heard that they were 16 and 17.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't believe it from her voice that she was 17. In case you didn't know, she is. But what bugs the hell out of me is that people say, science is difficult, therefore I can't do it. But you don't say that about music or art or literature. I mean, you don't have to be Eric Clapton to enjoy the guitar. You don't have to be Pablo Picasso to enjoy a painting. You don't have to be Shakespeare to enjoy reading literature. But somehow we've perpetuated this notion that you have to be a professional scientist to enjoy science. Whereas, I mean, Richard is the canonical example with the selfish gene and others, and the rest of us too, I suppose. But that joy, the aha experience, is orgasmic, and you don't have to be a scientist to enjoy it. And yet, the conventional wisdom is people say, "Oh, it's not for me. I just can't do it." Book reviews are the same thing. You'll read long book reviews of economics textbooks that the reviewer didn't understand, but it's 20 pages long. But a great review of maybe not so much biology, but a great review of a physics book is, "It boggled my mind." You know, and that's a great review. If you get that, that's great. But people don't make the attempt to say, you know, these are interesting ideas. It takes a while to think about it. And sure, you enjoy Bach more if you understand all the voices in it, but you can still enjoy Bach without being a musician.
True. But how do you, I mean, still there is a lot of people out there who are more interested in astrology than astronomy, for example. Or they're more interested in alternative medicine than quantum physics. Or even worse, they think quantum physics is alternative medicine.
Yeah.
How do you reach them with this inspirational beauty of science that you all presented here today? How do you come across?
You know, I think that it's one of those wonderful examples where the truth is stranger than fiction. What people are grasping for in these metaphysical indulgences is often to have their minds blown or to feel something that's unnerving or thrillingly strange, right? And I think that if we welcome people into this world in which it is far stranger than we could have possibly predicted, where time slows down and the universe began, and maybe there's another multiverse, and maybe there's an infinity where somewhere else in the universe people are having this conversation, only we're in different seats, you know, and it's happening an infinite number of times around space. Like, these are possibilities that are real. And I do feel when people are invited into that, they let go of some of the other silliness because they're getting the same emotional experience, oddly enough, or being hit in the solar plexus by that truth.
And they are fascinating. I mean, one part of the problem is producers.
Sorry?
Part of the problem is producers. The media, the newspapers and TV people think that people aren't interested in science. But every time they put something on that's science, it gets eaten up. People really are fascinated by it. They don't get the opportunity because there's an illusion that they're not. And so I think part of this is perpetuated by the cultural elites, if you wish, that somehow they assume the public won't be interested in this, that, or the other thing. And whereas, in fact, it really is. I mean, my institute runs events. We get 3,000 people that come to listen to science events. I mean, this audience is self-selected, but But people really are fascinated by this stuff. They just don't realize it's science they're fascinated by.
No, exactly. But I think the whole sort of culture, the media culture, considers science not to be real culture by some strange way. I'll give you a very concrete example. The leading morning paper in Sweden have every Saturday, they have a list of the 10 best books right now. I promise you that 99 out of 100 books are fiction books on that list, Saturday after Saturday. And if there is a non-fiction book, it's about some kind of society issue, current affairs issue, which of course could be very interesting and very good, but it's never a popular science book. Almost never.
And so, I mean, I hate to say it, but the taste is manipulated, right? People wear fashion.
That's my point.
Because they see fashion in magazines. I taught at a university in the United States, it's an elite university called Yale, okay? And science and I didn't like being there because science was on a hill that most students didn't ever go to, not once. And then all those students become the magazine editors in New York. And I know, when I see the people in their scientifically literate, I know they went to Yale. But they're very intelligent, okay? It's not stupid. They just managed to become, we have this somehow, in 1900, you could not be considered a literate, cultured person without some cocktail party knowledge of science. And now it's quite the opposite. You're only cultured if you say, well, that kind of science.
Exactly. Why is it like that?
But I think Lawrence is right. It's manipulated by certain gatekeepers. I mean, even if we look at wonderful institutions like New Yorker does not publish science in their pages. I mean, very, very rarely.
I write for the New Yorker.
Okay, so they've invited me to write for them. I'm just clearly they're fixing their problems. No, but when the LIGO embargoed result was given to one reporter, it was a New Yorker reporter, and it was not published in the pages of the magazine. It was published online. And that was,
and actually I only write online. In fact, it's true. The New Yorker only put my stuff online, but not in the hardcover.
Not in the hardcover. Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and it used to be.
That is just a gatekeeping issue. Somebody's got their fists on that.
But the New Yorker used to. It's a switch in the 1960s. And I think you just need, celebrity helps, and Stephen Hawking helps. And so
I actually don't have as bleak a view as you do, Krista, though. I really don't. I think that people, as Lawrence said, come out for this, and that it's just a matter of time where that momentum will be recognized by people who haven't been aware of it or haven't understood the potential.
I think we shouldn't underestimate the difficulty. And biology is probably different. I think it's much easier my job is much easier to interest people in biology, because it's much easier to understand. I mean, I'm going to be absolutely honest. In Lawrence's lecture tonight, I did not understand a word of the of the Feynman diagrams and the photon having no mass and.
But you know it. She just said. But I
mean, I was completely baffled by it, and I'm in awe of physics because I can't understand it, and so in a way I don't blame people for saying it's too hard for me.
No, but you enjoyed it.
No, but you're in awe of it.
He enjoyed it.
No, but he's but you're in awe of it, and I think that's the point. You don't have to get everything about the Feynman, but if you get the idea that somehow we now know that these two forces that are very different are really the same, and that somehow an accident in nature, as I say, you don't have to get every voice in a Bach cantata to enjoy it, and I think just appreciating. Just hearing it, and you know what? Hearing it, I used to tell my students that, and this is true, you may have found this as a physicist, that the first time you hear something, you don't understand it. And the second time you say, oh, I've heard that before.
So there's also a famous, internally famous at MIT, a legendary quote. Nobody knows who to attribute it to. I think it was maybe Walter Lewin, but it says every talk in physics has to have three things: something everyone can understand out of respect for the audience, and something only experts can understand, out of respect for their expertise, and something that nobody understands out of respect for physics. Yeah. So I think Lawrence hit it.
But biology now, I mean, I'm in awe of biology as a physicist, and I think if I had grown up at a different time,
It is a great time for biology.
I might have become a biologist now but nevertheless, the complexity, as you pointed out, biology is complex, physics is simple. And in that sense, and we do the low-hanging fruit, and the hard stuff is
deeply mysterious, though. I mean, I take an evolutionary view that the human brain was never evolved to understand the very small and the weird behavior of the very small, or the very fast, for that matter.
Or the very long. It wasn't. We didn't evolve to understand evolution, but somehow we've agreed that it's.
And quite a lot of people have trouble with that.
But it hasn't. But it's there, and we need. But you're right. All these concepts are, as I sometimes say, science. But I think most learning. But science is there to make people uncomfortable, because being comfortable means you're never being pushed. You're never being pushed outside.
That's true.
And so evolution makes people uncomfortable because the idea, I mean, just simply the uncomfortable idea that these systems that look like they're the same generation after generation can somehow imperceptibly change. And so that's just part of learning.
But the idea that you're cousin to a woodlouse is kind of disagreeable to us. But
speak for
it's
yourself.
not difficult to understand.
But still, Richard, you say that we didn't evolve our brains to understand things, but you also talked about sexual selection. Maybe it's attractive to understand these things.
Yes, I mean,
So
I certainly think so.
that's
yeah,
That's
exactly.
been his personal experience.
No, but seriously, I'm quite optimistic actually, because it seems like the interest among people is actually growing when it comes to this kind of what I call existential science. I'll give you an example. I happen to know that Richard's book, The God Illusion, has been. It's in a pirate translation into Arabic, downloadable on the internet. Don't tell his publisher this. And it has been downloaded 13 million times.
Yeah, it's amazing. Really important. Really important.
That's only.
And the translator lives in Stockholm, am I right?
Don't tell them where. Yeah. And it's not because they're burning the book or anything like that.
But also, I think all of this is the same. Also, partly it's a generational thing. We always think it's worse than it was, and I think there's a lot of things that are pretty constant about level. I mean, there's no big evidence that the scientific, even as bad as it is, that scientific illiteracy is much worse than it was. Mm-hmm. And I know when I first became a professor, I know the older professors, I don't know if they do in biology, but the older professors would say, oh, the students nowadays are just awful. The old students used to be so much better. And I think it's just this perception that we have. So I think we have to watch being too pessimistic.
Can I ask you a pure scientific question? I mean, sometimes different science disciplines merges, and I know that your colleague, Jim Al-Khalili, I mean, in the sense of a British professor or colleague, he's researching on quantum mechanics, if it might have a role in certain biological processes, for example. What do you think about that?
I don't know enough about it. I mean, I'm aware of Roger Penrose's speculation that what is mysterious about the human brain, but not the human, about the brain, is because of quantum events in neurons. And I know that this is poo-pooed by people who
it's poo-pooed with good reason, I think. But Jim Al-Khalili and other people know that what's really surprising, and it's very non-intuitive, and you know, it still could be wrong too, is the quantum effects. Quantum mechanics only becomes manifest in systems that are very carefully prepared and isolated, and we can do that in the laboratory and produce these weird quantum phenomena. But there's evidence that photosynthesis and certain biological processes may require quantum coherence, which is this property, and it defies all conventional wisdom, because nothing is less isolated than a biological system. So it's fascinating if it's true.
This is what he's researching.
Yeah, that's what Jim. And there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people who are working on it. It may be true, but I think what's really is neat is that the fields of biology and physics certainly have merged. Actually, when I was a graduate student, I got depressed, which is what you're supposed to do when you're in graduate school, and I wanted to quit physics, and my mother had always wanted me to be a doctor. And so I did think of doing an MD, PhD, and going into biophysics. And I spoke to a guy who's a chairman at Harvard, and He said, don't go into biophysics. This was, 40 years ago. And I said, why? And he said, because it's not of interest to biologists and it's not of interest to physicists. And it was true then. But now it's the center. Molecular motors, the physics questions, the biological systems are becoming prime territory for physics to understand. And the tools of physicists, of course, are being used to study biology. So the two fields are merging like crazy. And I think that's great.
Sorry, no, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just really want to emphasize that I don't believe out there in nature there are these separate disciplines called biology and physics. We made that up. That is a human construct. And the tools that we apply to the discipline that we've carved out as physics, there's absolutely no reason why they're not going to permeate through. And I think we did this siloed thing in academia, and now it's starting to break down, which I'm looking forward to.
That's why I moved to my present university, actually, to put a plug in, because they said, the president said, I can't create a university that can compete with the well-known universities by making 19th century disciplines. But there's an Institute of Biodesign where you have physicists working alongside geneticists. There's a school of human evolution and social change. Because in the 21st century, these 19th century disciplines are not necessarily the right way to attack the big problems.
Richard, you were talking earlier about the body and soul. Obviously you don't have a dualistic perspective of body and soul, but still the soul as a metaphor for something that in practical terms is not describable in physical terms. Do you feel comfortable with that?
In the book, I quote two different dictionary definitions of soul, one of which is the supernatural, and one of which is the sort of soul as in aesthetic appreciation and that kind of thing. And that's the soul that I respect, and the one that I mean in my... Is it translated? I don't know what the Swedish title actually literally means.
It's the equivalent idiom in Swedish, with science in the blood.
Yes.
Or in the blood.
Well, I think it's a shame that we've allowed religion to hijack the idea of soulfulness anyway.
Yeah, or spirituality. It's another word which I don't particularly like, but there's lots of spirituality in science.
Yes.
Quantum mechanics, though, it is obviously the most counterintuitive aspect of physics. Do you think that we ever will have an intuitive understanding of quantum physics, or will we continue to just shut up and calculate when it comes to quantum physics?
We understand more about how it works, but we'll never... we can't... A much simpler problem, which relates to what Janna was talking about, is understanding curved space. We can never... we can mathematically kind of think about what a curved three-dimensional space is, but we never can... We're three-dimensional beings. We can never have an intuitive understanding. We can build up a mathematical knowledge of how to deal with appropriate mathematics, but we'll never have a picture of what a curved space looks like in our own minds. That's easy compared to quantum mechanics.
But is that because you've got to get into 4 dimensions?
No, because we see this, because the speed of light is so fast, we can only picture a flat space where light goes in straight lines, and you can't picture in your mind. It's not as if a curved three-dimensional space curves into a 4th dimension. It's just curved. Parallel lines are no longer parallel. So you take 2 parallel lines here, somewhere else they go like that. Because space is curved. You see, you can't picture it, can you?
I would say...
But these ideas, so quantum mechanics is something we'll never have that kind of intuitive understanding of because we don't experience it directly. We are doing macroscopic quantum mechanics now, which is giving us more perspective. But I actually look forward to the day when there are quantum computers, and when those quantum computers do physics, because I suspect they'll have a much better intuitive understanding of. I'm not being facetious.
And then the consciousness emerges.
Oh, I think it'll emerge, no doubt, and I think they'll teach us how to do quantum mechanics better than we can do it.
This is an interesting question about consciousness emerging, though, and I'm sure Richard has a more informed opinion. But I always sort of had this idea that our computational power with the small brains we have, as you pointed out, they're actually physically limited in how big they can be. It's so much data to process that we started to symbolize, right? You started to say chair and table and book as a way of understanding all the data. But if the computers are so incredibly efficient at processing data and they don't have to do that, maybe they won't ever have to make this proxy for the world, which then corresponds to an internal map, which says,
it'll be neat.
I am thinking about the book, and I have intention to move down those. They might not ever have to do it. I mean, maybe they'll there is this sort of theory about the zombies of the artificial intelligence, that they'll never be required to evolve consciousness the way that we were forced to by the limitations of our processing power.
Mm-hmm. It'll be neat, but we'll see. That's what's great. I mean,
See,
we'll
there's
see.
nothing wrong with doing biology.
Yeah. No, but
You
we'll
can
see.
sit around. Yeah, I mean, I think that's an exciting and yet terrifying prospect.
I'd like to talk about artificial intelligence in a little moment, but first, one last question about quantum mechanics, because I always hear from more New Age inclined people that quantum mechanics has shown that consciousness interacts, and with
That's
the
the
physical.
word. It's the most abused part of physics.
Exactly.
It is the notion that you can change the world by thinking about it is false, because you have to act on your thoughts, and people make money every day by telling people that somehow quantum mechanics tells you if you think nice thoughts, good things will happen to you. You'll make money, and people want to hear it, and we
Yeah.
all want to believe. And
The Secret is a book about that, for
It offends me
example.
tremendously. Those
Complete bullshit.
Oh yeah, and if we had a sensible society, those people would be put in jail.
But that's
No, I mean it. I mean, yeah.
but my question is actually, I mean, that's obviously the very vulgar sort of version of that. But still, you hear people say that real quantum physicists a while ago said that consciousness interacts with the superposition of the particle, so it collapses and so on.
Well-
and as I understand it, no serious quantum physicists today believe that. Is
No,
that correct?
Yes. If you look at quantum mechanics papers about quantum mechanics, or papers, every paper that uses quantum mechanics, which is essentially every physics paper, you never see the word consciousness.
No.
And here's a proof, which I got from a friend of mine who happens to have won the Nobel Prize in Physics, but that if consciousness mattered, then when you read scientific papers, in the paper they'd have to talk about what the person who was doing the experiment was thinking about when they were doing the experiment. But you never hear that. I know the answer will always be sex, but no, because
You hardly go through your
it never
lecture.
comes up. And unfortunately, we talk about the observer, but the observer can be an electron. And it's just the again, it's the problem of theory, which Richard has dealt with his whole life. Evolution as a theory, because we use these terms colloquially in English, and there's Swedish terms, I'm sure, and they mean something different for the public than they do.
Yeah,
and
theory
we
is
use
a
them-
good example.
And we use them very loosely. An observer implies someone who can observe, but the observer doesn't have to be someone, doesn't have anything to do with consciousness. It just means an interaction that changes the state of the system.
Yeah.
Because it's a very common idea, actually, that it actually interacts. Okay, artificial intelligence. I mean, I guess that you, as you're all naturalists, you would say that it's at least in principle possible for a computer to develop an intelligence, right?
Sure.
A consciousness, yeah, okay. Is this a problem? Should we be worried about this? Or is it just good?
I think it doesn't have a moral character either way. I think that we're...
Sorry, what did you say?
It doesn't have a moral character, that it's good or bad. I mean, should we be concerned about it? Maybe our pivotal role in evolution will be to initiate the era of artificial intelligence. I don't know.
But for
And,
example,
and they'll
if
replace
an,
us as a species. But
if an artificial intelligence emerges and develops very much faster than this, the human evolution can produce better intelligence, maybe the intelligence will understand quantum physics and the universe way beyond what we ever can understand, and we can just stop.
Yeah,
I
so
think there's a tremendous amount of maybes. Maybe they won't be concerned in physical reality at all. I mean, if we're always imagining that we put them in a robotics system, but what if they're just literally digital, connected to the internet, and they're perfectly happy, like in Her, the film, to disappear into the internet and don't care about the things we care about, and will just let us go on. I mean, I think our ability to conjecture about it is extremely limited. Is my feeling, and that the things we imagine about it are very limited.
I think Krista's worried about whether we should fear being
Should we
taken over
prepare?
or made redundant, or I feel they might make a better job of the things than we do.
it's more than that. I think people are always afraid of change. And I just wrote actually, this is a subject I've been thinking about a lot. I just wrote a chapter in a book that's going to be about artificial intelligence. And an example which I think is very telling, which I hadn't learned until recently, is, it was right around the time of Plato, that, so alphabet was introduced in Greece in the 5th century BC. And at the time, there were people like Plato and others who thought writing would destroy storytelling. Thought writing was going to be the death of humanity because you didn't have to remember things anymore. And no, they wrote this. Yeah. And of course, writing didn't destroy storytelling. But it was a tool that changed the way humans lived. And you might have liked the world before writing, but too bad, okay? And I think the point is that there is zero doubt in my mind that machine learning, which I like to think of rather than artificial intelligence, because I don't think there's anything artificial about it, that machine learning is going to change our world in ways we can't imagine right now. And it's going to change the future in ways that may terrify some people. Now, fortune favors the prepared mind, as Louis Pasteur said. And so it's worthwhile thinking about those possibilities, just as it is for with the recombinant DNA people. You got to think about what catastrophes can happen, so you can try and ensure those things don't happen. But whether you like it or not, artificial machine learning is going to change the world, and it can make the world much worse or much better. And part of it's up to us. It's going to get rid of jobs. Most jobs that humans now do will be able to be done by machines. Is that going to be awful? No, not if we pay people to go to the coffee shop and read books. I'm serious. I mean, if machines are producing the products that humans are benefiting, we have a choice. We can either let a few people who control the machine companies have all the money and everyone else be out of work and not have income, or we can say, aren't we lucky as a species that machines can do all this stuff, and now we can enjoy music and literature, the kind of thing that Keynes talked about in the 1930s when he thought the machine age would give people more leisure time. Of course, it hasn't. But
I agree with that. Moral philosophers have started worrying about whether we should have moral concern for the welfare of artificial machine intelligences, and whether they can suffer, and whether we should be humane towards them. And in principle, I don't see why we wouldn't. And I think that I think we're nowhere near that at the moment.
Yeah.
I don't think we feel any compunction switching a computer off in case it feels upset. But there may come a time when that does happen.
I feel a compunction to throw it against the wall sometimes.
Well, the Howl in 2001 saying, "I'm afraid, I'm afraid."
Okay, last question. Some of us have small children, or some of us have grandchildren. What is your best advice to parents or grandparents how they should introduce, kids like 7, 8 years old, how to get them interested in science, inspired to think scientifically? What should we do?
You start, Richard.
Well, I favor the Carl Sagan approach of the poetic science, the spiritual, the soulful, the sense of wonder, which is not conventional. The conventional approach is to interest them by making it practical and bringing it down to earth. Yeah. And the effect of the influence of science in cookery and things like that. But I'm bored by that. I prefer the looking out into the great open spaces of the universe and back into geological time. I found that children absolutely riveted by talking about the age of the rocks and the size of the universe and things like that. There's a wonderful children's book that I've actually used with children. Just to explain the scale of just local cluster of stars. Take a soccer ball, which represents the sun, and then put it in the middle of the school playing field, and then walk whatever it is, 20 paces, and put a peppercorn, a smaller peppercorn to represent Earth, a pinhead to represent Earth, and go on and walk 100 yards away and put a ping pong ball for Jupiter, say, and do that for the solar system, and then to get to the nearest star, Proxima Centauri, pick up another soccer ball and to the same scale walk 2,000 miles. And that's just the nearest star. Well, children just love that. I did it with a group of sort of 8-year-olds, and they were enthralled by that.
I actually did a very simple thing just a few days ago with my 7-year-old kid. We went out and looked at the clear night sky with stars and laid back on our backs. And I said to him, imagine that you are looking down instead of looking up when you looked at the stars. And I could really sense how something happened there.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
You lay down like this and think
Yeah.
you're looking down instead of up.
Yeah, well,
You should try it.
You go.
I utterly agree with Richard that it is absolutely about wonder, but all children just are scientists. They just are.
Exactly.
Every human being develops by palpating the world and testing it and thinking about it, and then developing an intuition which is utterly taken for granted. And so absolutely certain that we're all scientists when we're young. We just have to not stomp it out. Not everyone has to grow up to become a professional scientist by any means, but we just have to not stamp it out, actually, and to encourage, to stoke the flames with this kind of wonder.
Well, I get asked this a lot, and I think it's really the same thing for parents as teachers. Two things, which is that the first thing that's really important for the most parents, anyone who's been a parent, I've been a parent, that doesn't like to say, but they should be thrilled to say, is I don't know. Because everyone wants to be the authority figure for their kids. And when your kids ask a question, you should be thrilled to say, I don't know the answer. Let's find out. Because then the act becomes an act of discovery instead of an act of regurgitation. And that's why I think teachers should also teach with questions. The realization, the other day I was just, actually it was when I was at a movie that I'm in called The Farthest, which is about the Voyager satellite. And it hit me that every time a kid learns something, it's the first time for them in the history of the world that that's been learned. It's an amazing act of discovery, but we don't treat it as act of discovery. So say I don't know, and then follow it up with questions. How can we find out? Turn the act of learning into a discovery, which is exactly what Janna points out. All kids discover that fire is hot by putting their hands in it. But that should continue. Everything should be an act of discovery, and you can work with your children instead of talking at them, playing with them. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, Richard, Janna, Lawrence, thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.